Operator Ryan from ABC Radio Brisbane, just upstairs. And welcome, thank you for coming. Look, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of the Turrbal and Yuggera people. On behalf of the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, welcome to the QSO studios here at South Bank, Brisbane, Queensland. And it's very special to be in here, isn't it? Also, of course, we're here for Supporter Connect. So we're about to talk about the future. That's the topic today. Some very interesting discussion I think we're going to hear. I'd also like to welcome our wonderful supporters in studio and online. Thank you for always standing by our side. We really appreciate it. A warm welcome to our special guests as well. Mr. Rod Pilbeam, QSO Chair, Ms. Yarmila Alfonsetti, QSO Chief Executive, Mr. Henry Smurden, Professor Ian Fraser, AC, and Mrs. Caroline Fraser, members of the QSO Supporter Connect Advisory Group, Bill Owens, Managing Director of Veracity, and members from Corporate Partners Health and Wellbeing Queensland and Marta. How about a round of applause for everybody who supports us? Let's get talking, shall we? We've got a bit to get through. I'd like to introduce the panel for you, firstly. Dr. Neal Harvey, Chief Executive Officer, Tim Fairfax Family Foundation. We also have Dr. Fiona Hinchcliffe, Executive Director, Residential Care and Community Services, Marta. Mr. Hugh Jones, QSO Section Principal, Oboe, from our orchestra. And Dr. Robyn Littlewood, Chief Executive Officer, Health and Wellbeing Queensland. Please make them welcome. I'll get them to run through a little bit about what they do in their organisation, firstly, as a bit of an introduction. So firstly, to you, Neal, just tell us a little bit about the Tim Fairfax Family Foundation.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone. The Tim Fairfax Family Foundation was created by Tim and Gina Fairfax in 2008, and I'd just like to begin by acknowledging their long-standing generosity and commitment to Queensland and Northern Territory, which predates the act of creating the foundation, but also that act itself. The foundation exists to ensure that people living in remote or regional areas of Queensland and Northern Territory have the same access and opportunities that their metropolitan counterparts do. In that time, since 2008, we've distributed $60 million in support of that goal, and the foundation continues that work today. We're proud to support the QSO and work with the QSO in touring the orchestra into remote and regional areas also.
And how important is something like this to let people know what you do?
I think that it's really important to talk about the role that philanthropy and supporters, like everyone here in the room, has in supporting the work of an organisation like the QSO. I think that the more that we talk about this, the better we get at providing support, and then the more opportunities we create for that support to do good out in the community.
Thank you, Neal. Dr. Fiona Hinchcliffe, tell us a bit about what you do.
Thanks, Loretta. I look after all of the out-of-hospital care, or not all of it, but a large part of the out-of-hospital care. So we know that Marta is a long-standing community member of Queensland in the health space. In fact, I think probably the Marta hospitals have been a part of everybody's story in Queensland at some point. But Marta is also, despite that history, is very proactive in how we keep people out of hospital. And I guess that's the role I play in overseeing how we provide programs into the community, into the home, online, in workplaces to keep people fit and well and away from hospital.
And that's obviously something we'll be talking a little bit more about this morning. Now, Hugh Jones, Oboe extraordinaire with the QSO, and a whole heap of other things as well, but tell me a little bit about your role.
Yes, well, I'm the principal oboe player. That just means there's 4 oboe players in the orchestra, and I'm the one who has to organise the roster.
I think you do a bit more than that.
And get to play the concerts, which is wonderful. I'm coming up to nearly 10 years in the orchestra now, which makes me a relative newcomer in the orchestra, as more than 50% of our orchestra have been in the orchestra for more than 25 years, a lot of them upwards of 30, and a couple of people who are 40 plus in the orchestra. So my role obviously is to play music and make sure that the oboe section is happy and healthy and playing well, and I love it. I wouldn't want to do anything else.
And of course keeps you healthy too, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on. And Dr. Robyn Littlewood, Health and Wellbeing Queensland. Tell me about your work and what Health and Wellbeing Queensland does.
Look, we are now in our 4th year. It is just the most exciting thing that you can possibly see within the state government right now. So for us, this is about prevention, which is really, really important, especially thinking about the past years. We've had those really hard years, really, really tough. Thinking about the way that we can keep every single one of us well. So we've got three very, very small and very easy jobs, which I just laugh because we've got to reduce obesity rates. So anyone that's tried that, I mean, I've now been working on this for the past 25 years. I've got to say it's the most difficult thing that you can possibly do. Number 2, we've got to try to reduce chronic disease rates as well, and that's one of the most important things now because we're now thinking about health so much more. Number 3 is about equity as well. So just to ensure that we get the right support to the right communities at the right time. So they're 3 incredibly difficult jobs, but we are so passionate, and we've got an amazing board, and we've got our own act that helps us, supports us to do this as well. So for me, it's the most exciting thing in government right now.
And all those things are important for the future. But I suppose, and today we're talking about the future, but we can't really have a conversation about the future without really knowing what we want it to look like. So I want to ask each of the panellists about their thoughts, how they see the future and what they want to create. So firstly to you, Neal.
I think that we'd like to see a future where every child has access and opportunities to what they need to pursue the future that they'd like to pursue, regardless of where they're born.
And I know, going back to Dr. Robyn Littlewood, I know that you're in particular focused on children coming up, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely, and I really hate going last here because those words were exactly what were going to come out of my mouth. A future that is completely fair. It's got to be about the kids. It's not actually about us. It's got to be about the kids and those that need it the most.
Well, then, how do we do that? How do we look after the kids?
There's so many things that we've got to do at the same time, but also we've got to actually do it together. So, to work in schools, to work in health, to work in communities, to work in everything, and ask consumers what do they actually want and need at the same time, but not in isolation. We've got to actually do it together.
Dr. Fiona Hinchcliffe, the future, how does it look for you?
Well, Loretta, the future in healthcare is exciting and changing quite rapidly. So there's been, as you all know, there's been rapid advances in healthcare, and COVID particularly saw an acceleration of virtual healthcare. And again, the future is around access and equity to high quality healthcare. And we see in health, we're faced with the challenge of an increasingly ageing population, soaring health costs, and a limited workforce. So the future is really around clever, co-designed health strategies, approaches, models of care, so that people have access to the care they need and that the care is what they're looking for. So people's expectations of care has changed, or health and their participation in health has changed. So in healthcare, we need to be ahead of the game, and the future is where we can be providing healthcare that's sustainable and also relevant to our communities and meeting all of our communities' needs.
And do we need a change in attitude toward ageing as well in the future?
Yeah, there is an increased focus on ageing because of our increasing ageing population, and I think with time, our general population is becoming more health literate and is more willing and more able to have health information at their fingertips. So it's really how we use those, our online presence, our education programs, and really how we engage our community. So how we as healthcare providers really infuse ourselves with the communities to make sure that we are providing community programs that promote health and well-being so that people can stay as functional and as independent and meet their health goals, whatever they are.
And Hugh, I'll bring you into this now because you are in that education space as well with QSO and with what you do. So for you, how important is that? And then how do you see the future of that?
Well, the future of the arts is a huge topic and gets talked about a lot. And there's a lot that can be said about that. I suppose what I've been very interested in most recently is in that education space, that the wealth of evidence and information that's out there that suggests that there are strong, not just correlations, but also causations, whereby music and integrating music and art into children's lives leads to educational outcomes, social outcomes, and wellbeing outcomes. So the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, as the largest major performing arts company in the state, is very well positioned to be able to deliver some of those outcomes across the state. And look, as you guys will all know, it's a huge challenge in Queensland, massive state, very decentralised population, all that sort of thing. But this is why we need to advocate and why we need support. Our ability as an orchestra to go into communities, it's not just going into classrooms, but it's the parents of those kids as well, it's the communities. And to be able to speak into those communities and show them that learning a musical instrument will not just make your child smarter, and there's evidence for that, but will make them more well-adjusted, make them increase social skills, executive function, the ability to work with others, all these things which actually, interestingly, our big corporations say are kind of key recruiting drivers for them into the future. As we look into the future in Australia and society more broadly, something you hear about a lot is innovation, creativity. All these activities are supercharged by music and supercharged by children learning music and integrating that into their education.
And you don't have to be good at music. I mean, the children can learn, but they don't necessarily have to be in the orchestra, do they?
That's right. Well, yes, so it's a common thing to hear parents say, oh, well, my child's not going to be a piano prodigy, or I don't want them to be a professional musician because, there's not much money in it or whatever. So I don't think, we're going to kind of drop the music lessons for now and they're, because they're taking up an extra whatever other co-curricular activity. Yes, and as you say, to that, we say, well, the activity of having music lessons, doing as little as 5 to 10 minutes practice per day, engaging in ensemble playing with other human beings, having your auditory processing units and your brain stimulated by that music making has benefits across a whole range of life and of children's education.
Yeah, it's a form of connection, isn't it, with everyone? And Fiona, you might have seen how important that is, and not just music, but other connections in the aged care area?
Yes, Loretta. So social connection is fundamental really to good health and well-being. And when we look at our programs, particularly for our older age groups, it's really a very much around holistic health. And social connection, or what we call social prescribing, is becoming more central to some of our models of care. So this is where it's not just around how much exercise and of course your diet, all of those things are inherently important, but so too is how well you're connected into your community. And whether that's through attending an orchestra with your friends, being members of associations, or just even your neighbourhood and your family. But also part of our work in social prescribing is understanding what are the community groups, what are the community activities that are available to people. And very often people don't know what those are. So increasingly now, and in fact in the primary health, the GP 10-year reform, social linkage roles have been identified as being really important going forward. And they're absolutely about connecting people into their community to keep them better supported and better able to look after their health and well-being.
And if anyone wants to add anything at any time, feel free to jump in. Neal, for you and for the Tim Fairfax Family Foundation, it's connectivity, resilience, all those things are important, aren't they? What have you seen in the work that you're doing about how they do help?
They absolutely do help and make a difference to not just individuals' lives, but our communities' economic and well-being more broadly. We were last year, I think the QSO, Hugh and 12 of his colleagues were a rotating roster of, toured to 27 different locations, delivered 74 concerts, 110 workshops, and provided teachers with 34 professional development opportunities, exactly of the kind that you're just talking. So that's a supply-side intervention that is creating opportunities for connectedness. It's giving these kids these learning opportunities, which helps build resilience, these new learning skills, learning new things, working with others, learning how to work in a group, meeting new people. All of these give kids an opportunity to develop the skills that will put them in good stead for later in life, we hope.
Yeah, and it's not just kids, it's all of us at any age, isn't it? Is it something that we've got to look at that we may have missed out on? Have we done something in the past that we want to change so that our kids have a better future? What would those things be?
Can I add to that too? Because I really don't like speaking after you, because it would have been everything that I would have said as well, Neal.
We've got to swap seats.
Okay. Next time we're swapping,
Right.
okay? Throw
Put
to me
you there.
Throw to me first, because that's very, very clever. But I've got to say, I've got three boys who are 20, 20, and 21, and so they've been through the hard times as well at school. So that's been hard. And do they graduate? And COVID, it's really, really hard for you, and you have missed out on so much. And for me, I think they have learnt so many skills that I did not learn. So there's that pivot there as well. And for me to do a grad speech for the university a little while ago, I got up and said that you've got skills now that nobody has ever had before, and they hadn't thought of that. Even mum and dad now, mum and dad who are in their 80s, Zoom me at 6 a.m. in the morning, or Teams in them, and I think my mother's in my house, and she is. But so that's been good. But they have learnt resilience, which I absolutely love, and kids need that, but they don't. So being kids being taught that it's really bad for you, and I'm really, really sorry for you, and you didn't get to go to uni the same as me. They are so much better than me. They have learnt so many more things, and the way to pivot every day to look at the data and to actually make a decision today whether we can go out, whether we've got to wear a mask, whether we look at our phones to use the bomb. So looking at the weather today, kids do that now so much better than me. So there's just that as well. So keeping it positive, but knowing about the things that we have gained without even knowing it is really, really good.
Keeping it positive for them, but also, I suppose, keeping it positive for us too, and as we age, so that we don't feel insignificant. So how do we turn it around so that we're both learning from each other?
Loretta, I think that there are some really good community programs, and probably this overseas we can learn from a lot of what is done, particularly in Europe, where the integration of the young with the older population has shown very positive health benefits developmentally for young children, for university students, and for our residents of care facilities. And I think that that's a really interesting thing to look at, because that is about bringing those generations together, sharing of skills, sharing of the wisdom. And I think those sorts of programs where we can integrate them into our community work will actually show some very positive benefits in Queensland. And it's particularly hard in the regions for people to be connected, but I think this is where where social connectivity is even more important, and how we can facilitate that. We've really got to be innovative and proactive in that regard. But I would like to just add to Robyn's comment around where we've come from through COVID. And yes, definitely there's a lot of skills that we've all learned, some better than others, in how to cope with technology. But the flip side of that is that it did remove us from each other a little bit. And also that what we're seeing now is that with the pace of society and with our young people coming through and the expectations on them, and also with people tending to live a little bit more in isolation and being a little bit more secluded, it is very important to go back to the basis and to really look after your psychosocial well-being. And part of that is getting out into nature. And I think with 3 boys, Robyn, and I know with my own children, that encouragement to get outside into green space is actually extremely important. And again, there's an increasing body of literature in terms of what does connecting with nature do for our health and well-being. And again, we call this green prescribing. So where you're looking at how can I really holistically look after myself. Part of that is prescribing to yourself a bit of green time, connecting with nature. Again, to pair that up with social connection, 2 birds and 1 stone.
I like that, the green prescription. Yeah, it's making us go out.
Yeah.
And because you do notice a difference, don't you, when you get out of that space and enjoy what's around you. You stop for a minute. Have you all felt that?
Anyone who spent any time locked down in the past couple of years developed a newfound appreciation for their local park.
Yeah.
They were places that we became intimately familiar with after probably walking past and not paying much attention to for decades.
Yes.
Certainly some of our colleagues down in South, particularly so, found it, really came to found that new appreciation, and I think that will find a greater connection with those spaces, and they will become more important for us going forward.
Value them more now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really important to lead by example. And I think it's really, really important for somebody like, for us, for example, not you because you're really young, but, you've already pointed that out already, but for us, to really lead by example. So to actually leave and to leave the office so loudly. I'm going for a run, guys, I'm going out, I'm going for a walk, I'm getting out. Because otherwise people work and they work and they work and they work and they do not stop. And our workforce is truly amazing. They do not stop. For me to actually do that, I mean, there's times too, I mean, every single day it's hard to leave it, to go for a run. But I think it's the best thing for me to do what I can do for them. So, people ask me too, Rob, is there days that you don't feel like going for a run? It's every single day I don't feel like going for a run. It's not just, but you do it and you leave loudly. Come on, guys. You get out there, and it's got nothing to do with anything physical. It's just you feel better, you connect, you chat, you get outside the sun. It's everything. It's just amazing for physical, social, emotional, mental health. It's all those things. But my kids have got they've got to see me do it. My workforce has, my friends have, my family do as well, and my mum and dad do as well. Music is exactly the same. When I come to see you, I feel different. I feel transformed every single time, and I walk out feeling better and thinking about plans too. And now we've got to do this and this and this and this. So there's this thing that occurs with your brain that calms you or makes you feel better. Or so that's we are so lucky to partner with you and get to watch you and see you. But we've got to do that too for every single child there as well, because they've got to enjoy the benefits of that.
Yeah, well, when the children are little, we automatically give them a little, is it a xylophone? Is that what you call those things? Yeah. And or a little drum. So we're giving them those things early on, aren't we, to sort of teach them. But I'm wanting to know about, sometimes you take those things up when you're a child and you let them go. And coming back to them like I did with piano, and trying to come back to it later on in life, it's really hard to learn again. But how important is that for adults to learn the music or come back to it?
Yes, absolutely. So actually my lifelong, I call him my lifelong teacher, my lifelong mentor, is a man who taught me saxophone as a child and then was head of woodwind at Sydney Conservatorium of Music. Mark Walton, he spends all his life travelling around regional New South Wales, going into communities and starting up what he's started a group called Late Starters Musicians. And he goes into communities and spends a week or two there, like sort of holiday time, a lot of retirees, things like that. And by the end of the week, all these people who've never played an instrument before are performing a concert for their family and friends. And that is the power of music. And it is a lot harder, you know, our brains are less kind of plastic and that sort of thing and elastic when we're older. But the benefits are there. They're truly remarkable that people can come together and then feeling a sense of achievement, feeling a sense of unity, camaraderie. You know, one of the things that really differentiates music from say sport is that it's not competitive. It's purely collaborative, and yes, as a child you can go and enter Eisteddfods and competitions and things like that, but the basis of performing music is a collaborative affair, and it's where getting a group of people together and trying to get everyone to play their part so that everything comes together, and then you start together and you finish together. And that's and what happens in the middle is not. It doesn't. Yeah, that's something we say in orchestra. As long as we start and finish together, everything will be fine, and that's the only thing people remember. So. And so he goes into these communities and does late starter groups, and there's a Facebook group of late starters, and because you know most instruments you can learn in a couple of weeks the basics for most instruments.
The benefits are derived from engagement, not mastery. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's where the enjoyment lies.
So true. So that's not just music, that's everything, isn't it? Engagement in everything.
Absolutely. The doing of it is the point of it, not being the best at it. But you're still the best oboist. in that context, it's important, but for the rest of us, yes. Yes.
So these are all really positive things that we can see, and these things are needed, but are there barriers to us then making sure these things happen in the future? What would the barriers be to the programs maybe that you foresee? Neal?
Robyn?
Cost of living.
Oh, Robyn!
Thank you, Neal. I really do appreciate that. Cost of living right now is really, really tough. Whether you're going to buy lettuce or whether you've got to buy for, you've got to pay for kids' socks and shoes and things as well. So music, where does that sit? So it's so important. But then at the same time, if there's food versus piano, what do you choose? For me, that's not fair for us. And for us, we've got to change that as well, because kids cannot be about chance. We've got to support kids that need it the most.
Yes.
So how do we change the cost of living problem?
Cost of living.
How do we change that cost of living? How do we change that for people and make something like music more accessible?
I think that we've got to look at the reasons now behind it, and really look at the data, and looking at the mapping. Like to buy a lettuce that's been grown in the north. Now we've done the mapping. To buy a lettuce, it comes down from the north, comes down to Brisbane. It will touch 29 sets of hands to come down. So to go from the ground to a truck to a box, back to a distribution something or other, and then a truck, and then back, and that's 29 times 3,675 kilometres travelled, and through 7 organisations. So the cost of that is enormous for then communities to then receive that 11 days later from where it was grown, 11 days later, and it's revolting. So, and it's really, really expensive. So what do? We've got to work together better. So we've got to work with the freight companies, the truck drivers, we've got to be thinking about things differently. And COVID, we did that so well. So thinking about the things that we have learned, we've got to now apply it and do that.
Yeah.
Do the things that we have learned, because we did it so well for the past years.
We called it pivoting, didn't we?
We pivoted and we
that
were
word?
resilient, and yes,
it gets back
pivoted
to
on
that.
a daily basis.
I'll jump in with, in terms of how do you make music accessible, you know, and not having a parent having to make that choice between food or piano or what have you. I mean, we've been fairly fortunate in Queensland that for many years the government has provided I'm not sure if I'll use the right words here, but a specialist music teacher in every state school. That's sort of been changed a bit over the years, that there's now kind of an arts teacher where they might do a term on dance and then a term on painting and then a term on music. I believe the best way to make music accessible to children really is our governments need to understand that music is not just a great thing to have in the curriculum, but it is a real supercharger of the curriculum, and it is an enabler for
critical.
maths, literacy, all these things which we hold very in high esteem. Music has been shown to actually be a causation to those things. So if we are to treat music as something which actually fosters and which actually propagates those things, it makes complete sense for our governments to invest in music education for every classroom. And having, so some pilot programs have been run, one in quite a socioeconomic disadvantaged school in Sydney's West, in St Mary's, where the Australian Chamber Orchestra have through their partners, been able to introduce a pilot music program there, where the kids are just starting the day with 10 minutes of music, and it's 10 minutes of music each morning, and then once a week I think there's a 20 to 30 minute more focused, and it's all group tasks, it's not even individual lessons, and it's group classroom, and what they're starting to see is quite remarkable, seeing some of these kids who had very high truancy rates, suddenly the truancy rates are coming down, they're starting to be able to focus in class. Kids who start behind in their speech, in their reading, tend to stay behind in school, and music has been shown to get kids on the front foot when it comes to speaking and reading. That's preschool. I would love to see our governments investing in music programs in daycares. I would love to see our governments investing in education programs for new parents. There's a wealth of evidence to suggest that parents who actually sing to their children develop language sooner than parents who don't sing. There's been a trend in the last few years where children are entering school at a lower reading level than historically. So they're asking a question, why is that? Why are children entering school in this day and age slightly less able to read than they were in previous generations? One theory is perhaps that, particularly in lower socioeconomic areas, that perhaps parents are spending not enough time actually looking at their child and speaking face to face, but there's quite a lot of screen time going on.
Yeah.
So there's lots of theories, but what is not a theory is the fact that reading rates are going down, and I believe a real silver bullet to this would be music education.
Can I just add to that as well? You can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
And so for me, I've just been to Roma with you, and it's the most amazing thing to see these kids standing and sitting beside the best in the world. And these are the kids from the back of Roma who were you could hear a pin drop in that room. It was in this hall that was absolutely full, and I just could not even speak. I could not even think about being anywhere better. The kids were there going, oh, that's amazing, and Warwick was there showing someone the way to play, and I thought, imagine that, going into the back of Roma and going and doing this. I just thought it's just so getting out there to me is one of the most important things, and we are absolutely doing that with you.
Yeah, and teachers report you know, and you would have heard this in the media and things like that as well, but teachers report, you know, there's more and more pressures being put on classroom teachers and not enough minutes in the day to tick all the boxes. You know, they're like, oh, well, I'd love to do a music class in my classroom, but I have to do all these other things which the state has told me I have to do.
Yeah.
I think we need to have a complete rethink and a reset on what teachers are expected to deliver in their classrooms. And if there's a very simple amount of music training to a classroom teacher can make a world of difference. It doesn't necessarily have to be specialist music teachers in every school and the expense of that and all that sort of thing. Even just training our parents and our daycare providers and our kindy teachers and our school teachers on how to integrate music into education can make a world of difference to kids' ability to learn to speak and read. And as has been said, when kids are behind in their speaking and reading, they generally tend to stay behind in their speaking and reading. It's very hard for them to catch up.
Yeah, and I think, take a leaf out of I think it's the Irish book, the families over there, they sing all together, you know, they like to sing and party, but I think it's part of it, isn't it? When your children see that happening, they take part in it as well. And I wonder if, starting like that, a child with music, does it lead to an adult and healthy ageing? And Fiona, what does ageing look like in the future? And, you know, ageing healthily, what does that look like?
Loretta, I think ageing healthily is around the preventative measures that are put in place, and it's never too late to start putting those in. So ageing really is around our better ability to manage chronic disease, to manage obesity, also to manage the social determinants of health. And, you know, as Hugh was saying, education is fundamental to that, so that we know that children with poor literacy and poor educational achievement will go on to not be as health literate, not be able to support themselves as well in terms of developing skills that they need for healthy living. So I think that there is those systemic changes that we need to ensure. But healthy ageing really is about making sure our community programs are robust, making sure all of our communities, including our vulnerable groups, have access to these programs, and really keeping people out of hospital as far as we can. And here I am from the Mater saying we want you to stay out of hospital, but we absolutely do. You go into hospital, and of course hospitals need to be there. We must have them, but they really need to be there for the very acute and sick and the very complex. Everything else should be closer to home, should be accessible, and should be easy for people to integrate with. And our programs into ageing communities, so into residential care facilities, into retirement villages, but into people's homes, need to be more comprehensive and need to be more informed by our community members. So I think it's really important that providers of health don't just dream up some programs of care and this is what you need and this is what you could be given. We've moved a long way from that. It's really about bringing the community into the design of those programs. So, you know, what are the health goals? And maybe it is that you want to keep playing golf, or you want to do gardening, or you want to be able to play with grandchildren. So what do we need to put around you to make sure that you're absolutely functioning to that optimal capacity? And that's really what we're all about in terms of our design for healthcare into the future.
And what barriers then are you facing to get that happening?
Well, I think that we're facing a paradigm shift, Loretta. So I think that we need to really understand that we can't continue to service our community's needs in the hospital, in the four walls of the hospital. So we're having to have a bit of a thinking shift, and associated with that is a funding shift. So we need adequate funding and reform to be able to support those programs in the community so that they are accessible. One of the key barriers we're facing is the expense of healthcare. So if we can devise healthcare programs that are lower cost that reach more people and are more accessible. So using, where we can, digital health, virtual platforms, that is actually going to help us sustain good healthcare into the future. The other big barrier we have at the moment, which of course is everywhere in all industries, is workforce. So really, how are we training our workforce and getting them work ready, but also not necessarily in the traditional roles, but how can we use skills from all sectors to enhance the provision of healthcare in the community.
And I suppose that takes us to philanthropy, doesn't it? Which is why that is so important. What are you finding in that space? How good are we at that?
We're bad at thinking about the future. As a species, we're terrible at it. We struggle to think in timelines that are longer than the present and what is most immediate. And that was really great when we were on the savannah and needed to stay alive because there were predators chasing us. But that's not the case now. And we need to evolve and get better at thinking in 25, 50-year, 100-year timelines. Is what we need to do. So when I hear my colleagues talk here about the problems, I'm going to use a phrase called systems change is what's required. Systems change, if you are in the patronage or philanthropy business and the kind of the difficult work that you're both doing will be a common phrase, but if you've not heard of systems change is where you come across a barrier that things don't work because they've been designed not to achieve an outcome. It's a process that is put in place. If you've ever come across someone who said, oh, that's not how we did that last year, you've run into systems change, a systems change issue. Affecting cultural change, crossing that threshold is the greatest challenge in any of these issues, and they're not just confined to the health sector, that's the education system as well. There are these systems in place that are just in perpetual motion, and trying to kind of weave them together to get patient-centred outcomes, to get child-centred outcomes, to get community-centred outcomes is the hardest issue across. It's the umbrella issue that sits above all of them.
Yeah.
Part of Tim and Gina's vision for the foundation is to play a role in trying to affect this kind of systems change. And the philanthropic dollar has a role for that, at piloting initiatives, in the discovery space, in the big thinking space, so that when things work, our wonderful institutions like government, like MARTA, can then scale them up and deliver them to the community as required.
And do we have a healthy philanthropy community in Queensland?
I think that we have an increasingly civic-minded community. Philanthropy is a really complicated word for giving back to the community. And it isn't just about dollars that people give back. Queensland has one of the richest cultures of giving in the country. You only have to go down to the Gold Coast any weekend and see thousands of people giving up their weekends to keep people safe in the water by sitting on the beaches. That's philanthropy, that's giving. We're really good at giving in Queensland, and I think we have a capacity to get better.
How do we, I suppose, get more people involved in that then? You've given that example of the lifesavers, but how do we get more people in that giving space where we need the dollars, I suppose?
I think that we just, quite simply, we just talk about it with our friends. And I'm sure everyone who's here says to their friends, I'm a supporter of the QSO, you should be too, it's really great. I think the more that we talk about it, we normalise it. I think that we're a humble community and that people are modest and that we fear that we might be saying something we don't intend to say when we talk about, I'm a supporter of this. It feels risky. What if someone says, I don't like that, I don't support that? I think we can be a little bolder and be a little more supportive of one another in general so that everyone can be more supportive.
How do we compare to other states?
I'm most interested in how we collaborate with other states. I think there are times when we are 7 states and territories, and there are times when we are one nation. The pursuit of a better future for every child in this country is a time when I think that's an ambition we can all get behind.
Would you agree? We don't compare, but we collaborate. Are we collaborating?
Every way, shape and form, absolutely. We are small. Prevention is small, and so for us, we've got to do the same thing.
Are we collaborating though towards the future with the others?
We are. Absolutely, we are. Yep.
And Fiona?
Yes, certainly, Loretta. We have good networks of hospitals that are very much, we're all faced with similar problems. So it is absolutely about learning from each other And yes, there is some healthy competition too, especially in the private sector, but that's good, that's positive, and that's what helps us advance in terms of developing strategies that are really going to meet our community's needs.
When we talk about the future, you said we're bad at discussing the future, bad at looking ahead. Is there a fear of the future, do you think?
I think at the moment, I think we're coming through COVID. I think that people are thinking about it more. So Neal's absolutely right. So there's not been a, let's just go out tonight and let's just go out and, I don't need to do a run today, or I don't need to walk today. But I think that people now are really, really thinking about health and thinking about the longer term. So prevention is the most important thing, but it just takes such a long time as well. So thinking about the future now is good, and I can feel a shift. I can feel a shift, especially when you start talking about kids. Who doesn't want to get it right for their kids? So yes, now, yes. Probably a little while ago, no. And I think that COVID taught us that.
Is there a fear of the future, Fiona, in your sector?
No, I don't think that I would say there's a fear, Loretta. There's always anticipation of the future. So health has and always will be very future focused. So there's always technological changes. We're looking at artificial intelligence, robotics, etc. So there's an excitement about what's at play in the future for health. So I think that probably the costs, the associated costs of living, the population growth and the population problems and the world events and affairs have a big impact on how health develops. But no, there's a lot of positive growth and development in health, and I believe it will continue to accelerate.
If there was something that you would love to see that you think is out of reach, and we have discussed that a lot already, but is there a future project in your mind that is vital to us succeeding in the future, living well in the future, being happy in the future?
Yes. Generation Queensland, Generation Q, is to me one of the most important things that we can do. So this is about getting it right for our kids. So this is about making sure that they have food, making sure that they have care, that they have access to care, making sure that we support clinicians as well, so that they can feel really, really, really empowered as well to talk about things and to talk about chronic disease and things as well. And our First Nations communities and kids, they are the most important, and they actually need it the most for us. So for us to think about support, Gen Q is coming. Gen Q is something very, very, very big in government now, and thinking about the future, and it's positive. It's positive, which is lovely. We're not talking about COVID anymore. Yeah. We're talking about this, and health is different now too, and I just love that too. That now we can now partner with the arts. I mean, we've not done this before. So things are getting better, and things are gonna change for me. So Gen Q is it for me anyway.
I'd say the development or the adoption of a national cultural policy, which is a current federal government priority, and I believe, and I'm optimistic, will be announced with not too distant future. The government has accepted submissions, I think more than 1,000 submissions from around the country on it, and that will be for the first time a document that acknowledges the primary role that arts and culture play in us as a nation. And I think that a statement like that, while it requires then implementation strategies, is one of primary importance that secures and underscores the point that Hugh's making about how critical it is our plays in our life.
Yeah.
So that'd be a great thing to see.
It's a complete no-brainer. Yeah. I mean, obviously, to us in the room. But, when you think about it, if you're someone that holds, and not everyone does, but perhaps, but if you're someone that holds that, the real bedrock of our democracy and our society is freedom of thought and freedom of speech, well then why would you be anti-arts? You know, the arts tell our stories. Particularly when we're talking about historical neglect of First Nations stories and that sort of thing, having a national cultural plan where stories of our history and our past and our future can actually be articulated and supported and are not on the fringes and are not a sort of, well, let's just leave that to people who like that sort of thing and, you know, concentrate on the important things.
And in a really positive way, in a really positive way, and that's got to be the difference to me.
Yeah, and I think we saw it during the pandemic, even though we don't want to keep talking about the pandemic, but we saw how vital music was and how vital the arts were, didn't we?
Right.
People were doing things at home
Because we lost it.
Yeah,
Because we
that's
lost
right.
it, and then we couldn't do it anymore. We couldn't come to the ballet anymore, and it was. We have to get so well at making sure that we can prove the worth of us, and so we've got to get better together to do that, because there is so much worth. I don't know whether we've measured that or not.
And I think one of the things we've measured is both positive and negative. There's a wealth of data about the positive influence of music and the arts in the life of human beings. Like that's obvious. And then in COVID, we saw that the loss of those things had a hugely profound and negative impact on mental health and people's well-being and connectivity and community and social. So, you know, we've got both sides of the coin now. It's extremely positive, and when it's gone, it's extremely negative. And so that really should be informing our posture towards the arts in the future.
We've got about 5 minutes to go, but it's really great conversation. I want to ask you to go back a little bit, and we're talking about the future, but I want you to go back in your lives and just think about how things have changed from maybe when you were in your 20s to now. And what sort of changes have you seen? Have you seen changes for the better, or is there something there that you think, no, I want to change this so that it's better, so that, you know, my kids don't experience what I did? But is there something that you remember from your past that is better or worse than now?
You're looking at me, but Neal can take this one first if you like.
I guess it's just looking into the future and comparing it to what you had when you were a kid, or what you had. You know what I mean?
Can I say that it's this is going to sound very corny, but it's love for me. So love, it's still there. So whether you're with your mum and dad, your kids, your family, your brothers and sisters, that connection gets you through, and it's got us through COVID as well. It's that, and so for me, the things that have changed. Sure, there's been tech and things that have changed, but the most important things haven't. So things around love, things around having a Sunday roast. There's just still things, but music has always been a great big part of our lives, and I was terrible at it. I played the piano. My poor parents, they gave me so many lessons, and I will never ever show you how I play because it is the most embarrassing thing. But
Listened because they loved you.
And they loved me, yes. And I've done that with my boys as well, and so they all play. For me, it's not about being the best at it, but about connecting us and love and being kind as well. And we just haven't lost that. I really, really love that. So that's the most important thing.
Fiona, is there something that you've seen or that you experienced in years gone by and now you'd like to see changed for the future?
Well, I think that probably in a similar way, I think that the value of love and family around you is important, and we mustn't lose sight of that in the modern world. And I think that COVID has actually emphasised that for where people were separated from their loved ones. So I would agree with that. But I think too that probably while we're advancing and we've got a lot of technology around us and the world is progressing, probably what I would like to see is that we don't forget those basics, so that we do make sure that whatever it is that we're doing, that we actually are seeking fulfilment from some of those very fundamental things around human connection, around actually anything that evokes health and well-being. Music is one of those. We know the health benefits of music, the therapeutic. We use music in therapy a lot with people recovering from neurological conditions. So those kinds of things is really going back to the basics, and I would hate to see that getting lost in the evolution of a high-tech health world. So that would probably be what I would see.
Yeah, that would be a challenge, wouldn't it? Not to lose that connection because of that high-tech world, which sometimes we do see happening. Neal, did you want to add to that?
They're much better answers than what I was going to say. I was going to say there are too many varieties of milk now.
That's so true. Oat milk, everything.
As a dietitian, I get asked about that all the time, and that is so incredibly difficult. Why do we make it so hard?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yogurts as well. It's just, there are just shelves and shelves of yogurts.
That's stressful.
It's really stressful and takes a long time. Sorry, Neal, it's so true.
So I think that's along the lines of back to
Low
basics.
fat, no fat, skim milk.
Oh, what do you do?
Little gold
I don't
foil
know.
or silver foil on top of the bowl.
Absolutely, but do you know though, thinking about that, I mean, think about others, you know, that can't do that, that don't have choice for me. And so to make it fair for people, because life now is not fair. It's not fair, and so making it fair and just ensuring that kids especially get what they need, because they don't now. So, and that's in this beautiful state. There's kids that don't have food every day, and you just think, how is that possible?
Yes.
How is that possible? So to be fair for me is the most important thing that we can possibly do, and milk is just a starting point.
I'm going to wrap up by asking each of you if there is a message that you want to give to family, people watching, a positive message. Why should we feel confident about the future and be looking forward to it? I'll start with you, Hugh.
Why should we be looking forward to the future?
Yeah.
Well,
You might have a bit of advice for people as well.
look, for starters, we're still here. You know, and I say that as an artist, as a musician.
Yeah.
COVID was a dark time. In conversation I had with the Honourable Tony Burke earlier this year, he said that when the pandemic started, he knew he would have a bit of a fight on his hands with art, advocating for artists, but he did not anticipate that he would have to stand up in Parliament and advocate that they are workers, that they contribute, that they pay taxes. So you look at that, you think, wow, it's a bit of a dark time, but we are still here. The future is bright. As Robyn said, we have learnt a lot from the last few years. I think we are becoming a more empathetic society in general. A lot of caveats to that, because individualism is probably still the biggest ism in Australia, but we are, you know, there's pros and cons to that. And I think we are starting to become more empathetic as we learn more, as we listen more. For me, one of the biggest drivers for that in the future, which I would love to see, is reconciliation with our First Nations people, because it's not just to right the wrongs, and obviously that's a huge thing, but as we learn to listen, we then learn how to be a society and how to love one another more. So I do think the future's bright. I think more and more, and we've seen this in QSO, but more and more Queenslanders are engaging with music and are engaging with the QSO. Over the last kind of 10 years I've been here, we've extended our reach, and that gives me great optimism that we can continue that. I hope that as we engage with government and they see the benefits of music and see what it can deliver for society, that will then remove some of the roadblocks we have to making sure that every person has the ability to engage with music and the arts in some form.
It's our job to do that. It's our job to do that.
And Fiona, why should we be confident about the future?
Well, we should be confident about the future because we are, as a nation, becoming more and more engaged in our own health, engaged in accessing health. I think that in our First Nations communities where there is a concerted, although we've got a long, long way to go, there is very positive activity and actions in place to close the gap of healthcare, and it will be an ongoing challenge. But I believe that we've shifted in that space in terms of accelerating towards closing that gap. But I think too that now we, as a society, we have a generalised increased awareness of how to look after our health, what to look for, how to engage, and how to be empowered in that. So the healthcare is not necessarily something that's part of a patriarchal society, it's within us. And the health sector is very much aware of that. And I think that as that gains momentum, then so too will the government policies and reform that's required to help fund our health programs that are actually more preventative and more relevant to our needs.
Okay, and Neal, our confidence for the future, what do you see?
I'd agree with what everyone said, that there's real opportunity, and focusing on shifting the deficit narrative from what we haven't got towards one that focuses on what we could have, I think gives us cause for hope.
One final bit of advice for anybody?
Look, as we've heard today, there is incontrovertible evidence of the benefits of engaging with the arts, I think, for a happy and healthy life. So if you want to live a happy and healthy life, go out and buy a ticket to a show.
Well, what an appropriate way to finish, I think. Thank you so much. Look, once again, thank you to Neal Harvey, Dr. Fiona Hinchcliffe, Hugh Jones, and Dr. Robyn Littlewood. Another round of applause for them from our panel. Well, I'm feeling pretty confident. You're feeling pretty confident now about the future? About picking up an instrument, maybe? Yes, yeah? Late starters, any? Put hands up?
Go back.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been wonderful to meet you all, and wonderful that our panel was here and spent so much time talking about the future, and I think we all should feel very happy about what's to come. Thank you to our studio audience and also to everybody online. I'm Loretta Ryan. Thank you so much again, and see you next time. Thank you to the QSO.